Welcome to another franchise review series. I'm going to be covering all of the Hellraiser films. This is the first three. Really glad I got to get my hands on this box set when it came out because I have missed so many when it comes to collecting shit. But this one is pretty badass, and this is I actually had not seen the films when I bought this, so when I purchased it, these first three films were first time watches. But I'm going to be reviewing all of them, and we're starting with the classic 1987 Hellraiser, which is severely underrated next to every other 80s movie that like horror movie that's just praised all the time. This one just doesn't get as much love as the others, and certainly not as much love as it deserves. Because it has such an iconic villain, and I can understand. A lot of people hate the fact that Pinhead is kind of put to the side when it comes to the rest of the story and the rest of the plot. The final girl is severely underrated. I don't know why Ashley Lawrence doesn't get as talked about as like Heather Langenkamp or Cindy Prescott, who played her, Neve Campbell, or other final girls in other franchises. I mean, Ashley Lawrence is amazing in this film as Kirsty. One of the best. I mean, and she has this like feistiness to her. Like she's badass. She's one of the strongest final girls, and certainly one of the sexiest final girls, hands down. I mean, the girl is gorgeous. But yeah, it's just people overlook Kirsty in this movie like crazy in this one and in the next one. And it's a shame. And I mean, this is based on a book, and by Clive Barker. Clive Barker is the creator of the Hellraiser story, and it's just a shame that this film doesn't get nearly as talked about as it should. So I'm here to review this one and the rest of the series, which does contain a lot of bullshit in it, but we'll get there, won't we? 1987 Hellraiser. Okay, so this starts off with introducing the puzzle box, which is the main vessel of these Cenobites, which is led by Pinhead. Pinhead is like the king of the Cenobites. And this guy is buying this puzzle box from, we don't know it's a puzzle box yet, but he's buying it from this dealer. It seems seemingly in a foreign country, but could be somewhere in the United States too. And then we see him in his attic, and he's doing this kind of like voodoo shit spell with the box, and the box starts to open up, and you're kind of like, what the fuck? And then these chains just hook him down, and he's like hollering in pain, and the chains just drag him down, and you're apparently dragging him down into hell. And it's really freaky stuff. It's really freaky stuff. Like I said, it's a horrific film with a lot of pure horror in it, which is again why I don't know why it wasn't as praised or doesn't hold as much merit to being a classic. But then we are introduced to this couple. This couple is called Julia, and Larry, and they're moving into a house. Apparently, this house has been abandoned for a long time. We realize that it's Frank's house. Frank, who was in the attic, who got chained down to hell. But at the beginning, you're kind of wondering where this house came from. Regardless, it hadn't been lived in a long time. There's scenes of maggots. They do a lot with maggots in this movie. The house is run down, and this couple, Larry and Julia, basically want to start anew. And this is Larry's second marriage. His first wife has passed away, and he has a daughter named Kirsty, and Kirsty is introduced fairly soon as well. So they're moving into this house. They have these movers in there, and the movers are fucked. They're asking for beer. They're completely making themselves at home. They're hitting on the wife Julia. They start hitting on the daughter Christy. The movers are weird. Let's just put it that way. But it's a really funny scene. And we get a little bit of flashbacks going on. So what happens is Julia was having an affair with Frank, and Frank so happens to be the brother of Larry. So Julia was cheating on Larry before their marriage, I'm pretty sure, with Frank, with his brother. And this is before his disappearance, obviously. So when he was dragged to hell, he basically disappeared and nobody knew where he went. But he's also had a really rough life. I think he was a drug addict, so he was kind of known for disappearing. So it wasn't really a big surprise to the brother or anything like that. But he's been missing for like a decade. So I think he mentions that this house has been abandoned for a decade. So I'm surprised a little bit more investigation wasn't done towards Frank. But anyway, during the move, they're moving a mattress, and Julia is having a flashback of Frank sleeping with Frank in this flashback. So it's a scene of them fucking while they're carrying the mattress. So it suggests that Julia and Frank had sex on their marital bed at one point. And with the mattress being moved, Larry cuts his hand, and there's some blood drips in the attic where Frank was doing this spell thing. And with this blood basically summons up Frank, his soul, I guess, and he is resurrected into basically a skeleton, a flesh skeleton, I'll say, of his former self. It's really disgusting. Practical effects. I mean, when this guy is being resurrected, you see his heart open beating and stuff like that. And his bones just come out of the floor and they're dripping with like Vaseline looking bloody like gunk. It's really disgusting. And these practical effects, I'm not saying which is better, but these practical effects are like on par with like the Thing 1982 effects because they're so disgusting and they're so visually repulsing, and they look fantastic. It's all practical effects and they look so fantastic. Another reason why I'm surprised nobody talks about Hellraiser enough with everything going on in Hellraiser. Like I'm telling you, if they're on par with the Thing 1982 practical effects, in my opinion. The resurrection of Frank just looks hideous and grotesque and awesome. It's fucking horrific beyond belief. But yeah, the power of the blood, where he was originally dragged or summoned to hell with the puzzle box, he is now resurrected again, but without flesh. He looks like, you know, those science exhibits where they actually use dead bodies to show the insides of people's bodies and figures that at least I took a field trip to in high school. He looks basically like that. He's got like red, you can see the muscular tissue and red flesh, and he's completely covered in blood. And for every victim that I don't know if he eats or just steals their souls or their flesh, but Julia basically, he convinces Julia to go find him victims, basically. So Julia starts to go on dates with random guys, bring them back home to the attic, so Frank can basically steal their flesh, and for every victim, he starts to become more and more human-like. Again, I love Kirsty's character. She has a boyfriend, although the boyfriend is not really executed all that much. He's kind of just there. It's just established that she has a boyfriend, but just their flirting back and forth, and just her character, her style, the kind of outfits she wears. If she was in like the 2020s, she would probably be a hipster. She was very hipster like for the 80s, and she just has such a sweet personality, but at the same time she can be like super feisty. There's this homeless guy or homeless looking guy that appears every once in a while. He doesn't have any lines of dialogue, but he'll just appear in the background staring at people. In one scene, Kirsty works at a pet store, and this homeless looking guy randomly shows up there and starts staring Christy down, and eventually starts eating these locusts, which I guess are sold to feed to birds or something. But he starts to dig into this cage of locusts and just start eating the locust. It's disgusting. But Kirsty goes all like badass mode and kicks him out of the store in that scene. So at one point, Kirsty notices that Julia, who she doesn't like, by the way, she has a very big, I'd say, hatred for Julia. One, for being a stepmom, and two, because she just doesn't like her character. Kirsty notices that Julia is bringing a guy to the house, and she automatically assumes, of course, that Julia is cheating on her father. And she adores her father. I mean, they even have a lip kiss at one moment, which is played off as sweet, but I've never really seen too many parents kiss their children on the lips when they're fully grown. But hey, maybe some do. It is what it is. But yeah, she's really really close with her father and despises Julia pretty much. So she basically goes in and goes up to the attic to kind of check on what's going on. And this is where she ends up discovering Frank in the attic, and she freaks the fuck out. She really catches on to what's going on very quick in this movie too. I don't know how I feel about that, but nothing really has to be explained to her. She kind of starts figuring things out and is very clever and very smart on like because she doesn't discover the puzzle box really until she runs into Frank in the attic. And I love her attitude there too. She notices that Frank really wants the box, and this box is really important to Frank. And she's like, "You want it? Fucking have it!" And then she like tosses it out the window, and then runs outside, picks up the puzzle box again, and just runs away from the situation. She ends up fainting and being taken to the hospital, and she solves the puzzle box in the hospital because this puzzle box is weird too. Like it's called a puzzle box, but a lot of the people kind of solve it accidentally, not really knowing what they're doing, but just kind of fiddling with it, and then it'll morph into random shapes. And in the hospital, this door opens up, and she's in another dimension, and she goes through this tunnel, and then starts being chased by this again practical, awesome looking, sick looking creature with like a stinger, kind of like a bee stinger at the end of it, and this really fucking monstrous face. And she starts being chased down this other dimension hall kind of thing back to the hospital. And when she gets back to her hospital room in some other dimension, the Cenobites show up again. Again, this part I understand that people get pissed off where it takes so long to for the Pinhead to show up. And I saw the timer of the movie when I was watching it. When Pinhead showed up, it took over 66 minutes for Pinhead to show up for the first time in this movie. 66 minutes is a long time for your main villain to show up, especially one as classic as Pinhead. So one thing that I would call a mistake that this film did that they shouldn't have done and they should have done better is show more of Pinhead, because Pinhead looks incredible. And we just don't get enough of Pinhead in these movies. Eventually, Frank convinces Julia, because Julia is an absolute cunt, to I don't know why she listens to Frank. I don't know what she sees in Frank or is so obsessed with in Frank, but even before, like in the flashbacks, I'm like, why? Like, I don't get it. But anyway, Frank convinces her to kill Larry, so she does kill Larry, and now Frank has Larry's skin, and he starts to manipulate Christy for a little bit, and Christy starts to believe that it's her father because Frank is in her father's skin, and she comes home and she starts to get manipulated a little bit, but eventually Frank reveals himself to be Frank in Larry's skin, and it's heartbreaking to say the least, but it's also scary and it's sad too because of how much love Kirsty had for her father to have this situation going. And then the skeleton of Larry, the real Larry, is up in the attic, and it's completely just bones and blood and flesh, not flesh, but like muscle tissue. And she has to witness that and just the expressions on her face and everything. But she also ended up making a deal with the Cenobites and Pinhead because all they wanted really is Frank, who, they brought to hell at the beginning of the movie. He got out of hell, and he's really all they want. So Kirsty is able to lead Frank back to the attic where the Cenobites chain him up again and have his face like stretched out with the chains, and he's all like Jesus wept, and gets taken back down to hell again. And then we have this kind of semi twist, I would say, where the seemingly homeless guy shows up at the end of the movie and then he takes the puzzle box because Kirsty and her boyfriend toss it into a fire, and he takes the puzzle box and transforms into this demon-like creature with wings and flies off with the box. And then the final scene of the movie is the exact same as the beginning of the movie. We have somebody else wanting to purchase the puzzle box, and this guy who's selling it is like, I forget the line he says. He's like, "What's your poison?" or something like that. I should have written the line he says down, or "What's your fantasies?" or something like that, something along those lines. But I didn't write it down. But yeah, so it plays out it kind of bookends each other. The the film bookends itself with the opening scene and the last scene. And the puzzle box lives on, and the Cenobites live on, I guess. But yeah, I mean, for a film with this quality of practical effects and such an iconic, in my opinion, final girl who is beautiful and badass and really good in her role, why it doesn't get more attention, basically. But yeah, that's essentially Hellraiser in a nutshell. It's a rather disgusting, very effective horror film. And I didn't read the books or anything, so I don't know what the source material is like. But yeah, Hellraiser is fucking badass, and it's definitely, at least the first trilogy, easily, is definitely worth checking out if you haven't. I like the three first movies a lot. I'd say the first is my favorite, then the third, and then the second. And I'm going to be getting to the others, so I'm not going to be talking about them too much. But basically, the first one feels like an iconic, beautiful, single-handed film on its own. Like it could merit being just a film on its own. It doesn't need any sequels. The second one, I think, and I forgot to mention too about Hellraiser, the only negative quality about Hellraiser really is the CGI that they use. It's like Atari quality CGI, so it's very cartoony, very like it looks like cartoons in like effects in a live action film. It just doesn't match. It's just they didn't have the technology to do CGI in it, so they shouldn't have done it at all. But like when the puzzle box is being solved, like they have these little squigglies things that you see in fucking Atari games, and it just looks bad. But anyways, the second movie pushes the CGI even more, and that's what I don't like about it because again, they just didn't have the technology back then, so the green screens are just so noticeable and it just doesn't look right. It feels too cheap and that goes against the quality of the movie. Like it doesn't give it a good cheapness, it gives it a really bad cheap quality. And then the third just gets really campy and like soaks itself in 90s because it came out in the early 90s and it's cheesy and it's campy, but it's fun. Like it still takes itself seriously, but it definitely pushes the camp side of things, and it's very 90s. Like I said, it would be like if it's kind of like The Crow, except The Crow with Brandon Lee takes itself very seriously and is very gothic with like the the dark tones of it. It's a film that takes itself very seriously. It's like if The Crow was campy instead of serious, it would be Hellraiser 3. It gives Hellraiser 3 gives me a lot of Crow vibes in its style, but served with a lot of camp kind of thing. We'll get there though. Subscribe to Morgan Film Fan if you like to listen to my voice or if you like my film reviews. I'll be back with more soon, so stay tuned for that. Check out what's on the channel right now. Stay tuned for what's coming. Until next review, go check out Hellraiser if you haven't already. Until next time, take care and cheers.